Before we begin today's episode, we wanted to take a moment to do a couple of things. The first is to thank every single one of you that were a part of this year's Church Advance Conference. It really was awesome. So thank you for being there. And we want to go ahead and make sure that you have the opportunity to go ahead and get registered now for Church Advance 2024. This is going to be better than ever. We have a feeling we're going to see even more attending this year. And so we want to make sure that our podcast listeners are the first ones who are able to register, because really this is the reason that Church Advance exists, is because of this podcast. So we want to give you the opportunity to go ahead and be the first to register and get the largest discount that we are going to offer, which is 20% off of registration. This year, you're going to have new guest speakers, Mark Halleck and Josh Tice, joining us for the conference. We're also looking forward to welcoming back Kurt Skelly and H.B. Charles, and of course, the host, Brian Sams. You're not going to want to miss it. And again, we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to get registered before we run out of space. And you're going to get this huge discount of 20% off, the biggest discount we're going to offer on registration if you use the code podcast at registration. And you have to make sure you do that before the end of March. So again, to claim this discount of 20%, go to briansams.com, register for Church Advance 2024, and use that code podcast at checkout. Well, we are looking forward to getting to the main content of today's episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors and churches. This is Church Advance with Brian Sams.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Church Advance Podcast with Brian Sams. This is your host, Brian Sams, hanging in Florida this week with my co-host, Luke Clayton. Luke, what a beautiful day out
really
here,
is.
sun shining. They call it Sunshine State.
Yeah, well, and they've earned that title.
Yeah.
A lot of sun
Now,
here.
if you'd have been here early fall and spring, you'd have been calling it the Rainfall State. There
yeah.
are times.
True. You guys get a few storms down
We
here.
do. Yeah. Fortunately, Jacksonville is in this geographically in this kind of curve over there on the East Coast, and we miss a lot of the major stuff. Yeah. We're glad for that. Yeah. We also miss snowbirds here. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
But snowbirds go further south.
Yeah, they don't quite make it.
They don't stay in Jacksonville because there is potential for cold, but we don't see it very often. Yeah. So, man, what a great start to the Church Advance podcast. I've been glad, thankful to kind of refocus this. We're really trying to be more intentional on our teaching and help, and stuff for pastors. And so here we are. We're going to come into a new talk today. I get asked to do some of these talks. Sometimes it's Idea Network, sometimes it's a college setting, whatever. And I did a series at Pensacola Seminary some time ago on church growth, church health. Yeah. It becomes a topic of interest to me, church health and church growth. Yeah. Specifically today, I want to talk about this: resting in God's plan for the size of your church. Yeah. Okay. It seems like we always are in this tension about what does God really want? How do we define success? Yeah. And often when I get into these talks, I have to transparently say that I struggle with this. I do. I mean, there are times where I will go home after Sunday and just struggle. Like this Sunday, it was a huge crowd. Yeah. 2 Sundays ago, it was a little thinner, and you just keep thinking, well, where are they at? And man, goodness, surely we should be ticking along faster than this. And I got friends who, started about the same time I did in their churches, 50, 70 people more than mine. And stuff starts messing with your head a little bit.
Yeah, and not to mention there's a little bit of that depending on your training. For example, a lot of the Bible colleges out there are kind of spin-offs of larger ministries, mega churches even. And you go there and you see, and it's awesome to see how large these ministries are or have been. And it subliminally sets this expectation of, I'm going to leave and I'm going to go pastor, and grow this church and whatever. And so, yeah, there's that too to kind of deal with, kind of
Absolutely.
the under or unstated expectation.
Absolutely. We're going to get to that
Yeah.
as a point here in a minute, which is fantastic. John Piper had a book years ago called Liberating Ministry from the Success Syndrome. And I don't think there's any question that we as American pastors have been inundated with the idea of church growth.
Yeah.
And I've taught a whole doctoral seminar on the subject of the church growth movement, church health, and I want to say at the outset, just because something is large doesn't mean it's healthy. And health is not always predominantly indicated by numerical growth. There's all kinds of things in between on that. And I've had to come to the place in my life where I rested in whatever God size for the church. I got to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And I hope by the end of this, that this will really come together. But let me say something. Let me give a testimony first. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, look, here's the bottom line. My church has grown. Okay, so I'm not trying to be a cop out here. This is not, oh, Brian's got a dead, dying, struggling church. Nobody's coming, nobody's getting saved. You were here. I mean,
Yeah.
you were here Sunday.
Yeah.
3 adult men trust Christ, a Savior.
good
One man's
crowd.
baptized, great crowd. And when you go back historically, I've been here. This is my 7th year. At the end of each year, we have on the 31st of December, I've notated the membership logs.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I just want to go there. This is statistically factual.
Okay.
2016, we had 51 members. Now I did successfully grow the church from 69 to 51.
Yeah.
In year one.
Well
It was
Yeah.
it was powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously
Addition by subtraction.
I mean, you knew when I came to town, it was going down. Literally going down. Then by the end of 2017, we had 68 members, so we're almost back to where we started.
The original.
Okay. Now get this: 2018 on December 31st, 127 members. There was the double
Yeah.
in membership. Now that's not attendance; that's membership.
Yeah.
2019, now this is super interesting. At the end of 2019, we had 177 members. That's another 50.
Yeah.
But here's the amazing thing. That was with a church split
Wow.
in the middle of 2019.
Yeah. And you lost how many there?
75 adults.
Wow.
So the growth there was almost doubled again.
Yeah.
So you doubled from 17 to 18, you doubled from 18 to 19. And of course, COVID.
Yep.
But get this, at the end of COVID, 222.
Yeah.
Another 50. Okay, you get this. In 21, we dropped a little bit. The membership was 215, which is just interesting. I'm still like wrestling through that one. I'm still processing like what exactly.
Because we just talked through the King James transition, and you said you only lost like one family that you know of, right?
Right. 2021 was a real interesting year for us. There's people moved away. There was a few people that left, and to this day, sometimes I don't even know why. I'm not sure what happened. 2020. So we seemed to pick up during COVID, but then we lost some too. It was really kind of weird.
Well,
I don't know how to explain
I don't know all the stats on it, but I did. There was kind of this excitement that you saw amongst church people in churches just at, churches shut down during COVID for 4 weeks to 4 months, depending on where you're at. There was kind of this excitement that you could sense amongst people of like the world's opening back up. And so in that, there's a little bit of excitement to go back to church from some people. And I really do think that just church-wide, this is a whole other topic, but I mean, I do think that excitement kind of wore off and people kind of got over it, if you will.
I agree.
And I think there probably were some people that were like, well, church is great, but you know what? It was kind of nice to just have Sunday to myself. Unfortunately, there are people that think that way.
question.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was a trend across the board.
And I hate that. I mean, I look at this plus 50, plus 50, plus 50, plus 50, minus 7.
Yeah.
But then 2022, to date is 226. Back up again and projected to be over 240 by December 31st. I know who's joining. I know
Yeah.
it hasn't happened yet, but I know there's a few families that are coming. So I'd say at 240, that's again another 35 up from last year. So I mean, I want to start this by saying our church has grown, and I'm thankful for it.
Yeah.
And as you saw Sunday, there was adult baptism. There's adult baptism's coming. There's children baptism. I'm just saying we're trying to reach people with the gospel.
Absolutely.
But I saw this on Halloween night on Twitter. A guy wrote this. I don't know who he is. I don't know. I mean, his name's Jared Moore, but I don't know him. He said, I quote, I've seen faithful pastors turn the page and preach the text for decades, love God's people, go door to door sharing the gospel for years, and yet they pastor small churches that barely grew. You're a fool to think your church is large because you are more faithful.
Wow.
So here we are. There are faithful gospel men that will never pastor large churches. I mean, it's even statistically, Luke, good night. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, of course.
The median size is 100, I think. The average is 72.
That sounds about right. But I know
78.
that less than 1%, I believe it's 0.5% are actual mega churches,
Which is 2,000
or more. So
The vast majority are less than 100.
Yep.
Those are facts.
Yep.
Median size, it's half the churches before, the pendulum swings on 100,
Sure.
roughly. And then the majority are in that 70, 80 marker. I mean, just think about that. The vast majority of guys out there, when they stand and preach, that's what they're preaching to.
Yeah.
And there could be tons of reasons why a church is smaller. It could be location. It could be poor performance. It could be it's dying. It could be it's in a rural town of 1,000 people, and you're not going to get many more than 70, just statistically. So we know that the men are going to labor faithfully in places where there is not growth. Not every church is going to have 50 members a year. Not every church is going to grow to 2,000. Like I was talking to Josh Tice about this the other day, and Josh said, well, Brian, honestly, the difference between me and you is just 15 years.
Yeah, true.
And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, even that, even your psyche can go, is that the end game?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I appreciate him saying, I appreciate the encouragement. He was saying, we've never had dynamic, billions of growth. We've grown 50 to 100 people every year over 20 years. So I go, okay, I know all this, but how do I rest in this?
Yeah.
How do you sleep at night when there's more that you think you could do or should do? How does this all work? So I have written down 5 ways to keep trusting God, even when my church, I think it should be bigger than it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, let's dive into
All right, let's
these
go.
5. First one here is avoid the trap of letting others define your success.
Yeah.
We kind of touched on that.
That's the
earlier.
bottom line, but you nailed it. You nailed expectation. That's
Yeah.
it. My expectation is from the Lord. God defines success, period. So if I were to ask you, God defines success, how does God define success?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are trained to say numbers.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Of course.
And
And
for
obviously,
any industry, if you will, not just churches. There can easily be a businessman out there who says, well, because I don't have X amount of clients, X amount of accounts, obviously in business, you've got to have profits, you've got to have revenue, but there's even certain numbers that can be misleading in business.
I think that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is we borrow a business model.
Yeah, true.
And church, there's a business aspect to
Yeah.
church. Obviously, there's dollars and cents, so on and so forth. So let me answer the question. How does God define success? And I would say that there's one place in the Bible that I know of where ministry performance, preachers, and stuff were being evaluated. Okay, it's 1 Corinthians. So if you back up, look, and we're going to think in broad terms of 1 Corinthians chapters 1 through 4. Now, what was the core problem at the church of Corinth? Answer, division. That was the core problem. But what was facilitating the division? The answer is people, men, predominantly, personalities, preferences.
Yeah.
1 Corinthians 8 through 10. So in 1 Corinthians 1 through 4, it's one section of the book, and the basic argument is this: do not evaluate the performance of men, because God values, we should value the message more than the messenger.
There you go.
And ultimately, at the end of it all, God is going to judge the faithfulness of the messenger. So we're foolish on this earth to measure the success of a pastor, follow a pastor, be enamored with a pastor because we think he's successful.
Yeah.
The day of evaluating success is the judgment seat of Christ, 1 Corinthians 3. Then, of course, 1 Corinthians 4 says that moreover it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to say it's a small thing if I'm judged of you. Basically, God's my judge. And the point is God defines success, and the way he defines ministerial success is absolutely through faithfulness. If numerical growth is success, then Stephen was a failure. Jesus labored for 3 years and had only 120 in the upper room when he died, when it was all done.
Yeah.
It's a small church after 3 years. Jesus had large crowds walk away from him.
Yeah.
Stephen was stoned to death after his first sermon. Isaiah, Jeremiah, they were told nobody's going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to follow you.
Yeah.
So we know, and I would say this too, when we see things in the Bible about numerics, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. So did the Church of Acts grow? Of course it grew numerically. It's a historical fact.
Sure.
It's not saying churches are going to grow by this measurement. It's just saying this church did happen to grow. So God defines success, and then I wrote this down, and I want to try to see if we can come up with a couple of things here because I think this is good. There are things that make it difficult for us to settle on this.
Yeah.
And you mentioned one.
Yeah.
Let's revisit that here because what you mentioned, one thing that makes the numerical definition of success difficult.
Yeah.
And
we talk about the expectations.
The expectations.
Again, whether it's you're comparing yourself to the larger church, or like I said, in our context of being, coming from, and again, I don't know if it's exclusive. It's probably not. It's not exclusive, I don't think, to Independent Baptist because
I don't think so.
You can think of is it Masters College?
Yeah.
That's John MacArthur's school, and he's got a larger church, larger ministry. I'm sure that mindset's there as well. Of I go to this institution that is a product of a larger church or a mega church, and it is cool. I mean, it's cool to see what God has done in those ministries. It's cool to see, man. I mean, we've talked about before where you used to teach West Coast, Lancaster Baptist.
It's impressive.
Man, it is incredible to see that Paul Chappell went there in 1989 or whenever it was, 86, and then however many 30 plus years
people.
and it just exploded in growth. I mean, it's incredible, and God clearly had His hand and still does, I believe, on that ministry, And so I remember going to college there. You think, okay, well, if I were to go and start a church, that's what's going to happen, right? And, because they say, well, just knock on the doors and, be faithful and preach and, God, and it's, God gives the increase. But how much is that increase?
That's a great way to put it. How much is the increase? And I think so. You got expectations, and expectations get defined in different ways. Yeah. So if you can't let God define your expectations, somebody's going to define them for you. Yeah. And certainly your training can produce expectations. I wrote down here social media can define expectations. Transparently, I am probably about a week away from not following any feeds on social media. I'm working with my wife, who has taken over some responsibilities for me. I wish I was better.
Yeah.
But I'll see, I think back to Pastor Appreciation Month. I mean, I would watch, there's so many people getting, and honestly, 2 people in my church said, thank you.
Yeah.
And again, Angie, she was like, our church people probably don't even know what
they don't even realize.
And that's fine. And she even said this. She said, I'd rather be in a place where it only came when it was genuine instead of forced. And I was like, well, you're preaching at me. Yeah. But the point is, that can bother me if I'm not careful.
Yeah.
It can bother me that, in fact, when I was having this discussion on this call a couple weeks ago, I was in a private room before we made this meeting public. It was on Zoom. And I had shared with a couple guys, hey man, we had an awesome trunk or treat we had 1,750 people there, which is amazing.
Awesome.
I mean, it was crazy. Yeah. And then the group came in, and one of the guys got in. They were talking to him about his trunk or treat, and he was like, "Yeah, we had a record-breaking 7,500." and I just I sat there going, and again, that's my fault. That's my fault.
Yeah.
I shouldn't feel that way, but sometimes you do, and so social media can become an expectation setter. And I tell you, man, if it's toxic for you, if it's a problem for you, then I would highly recommend, getting off of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if nothing else, reducing your time on it.
Reduce your time on it.
Like you mentioned, maybe, I mean, seriously, if you're following accounts and people that are, constantly showing, their numbers or whatever, not to say there's anything wrong with that, but if that's doing something that
may not be
within
good
you,
for you.
and that goes to anything. It's the same thing. Like, hey, if you're a girl with self-esteem issues, like, don't follow supermodels on Instagram.
Yeah,
I mean,
right. Yeah, that's really a good point.
And so it's social media defines everything now.
Yeah, and we got to be careful of that. I mean, I really think ministerially speaking, it's particularly a trap. So let's get one more in here.
Yeah.
We want to avoid the trap of letting others define your success.
And the number 2 is going to be to recognize that there is always attrition.
Yeah. I mean, right before we came on the air, I think we were talking about the 10% rule.
Yeah.
It's kind of a widely understood principle in church growth that every church has 10% attrition every year. And this is not always a bad thing. It doesn't always mean. Let me rephrase that. It doesn't always mean that somebody's leaving your church because there's a problem.
Yeah.
Now, attrition. You will have somebody every year in your church leave because they're mad.
Yep.
Every year,
Yep.
no question. We would call that somebody that's disgruntled.
Yes. Yeah.
They are not happy because you did something, you said something, or somebody smacked their kid in the nursery, or you didn't sing happy birthday to me publicly, or you didn't say hi to me in the hallway, or even sometimes more sharply, you didn't say enough about Trump.
Yeah.
you didn't say something about woke, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's always that.
Yep.
But then even more simply put, there's death.
Yeah.
There's relocation. People move. That's going to happen. I mean, we live in the most transient, mobile society ever.
Yeah.
How about, at least in my city, multiple church options,
Yep.
which allows people to have options that they have a choice as to whether they're going to work through their issues or not. I went on my 7-week sabbatical this summer, and when I got back, frankly, a deacon left.
Wow.
And never said a word to me. To this day, now several months later, never baptized his family 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Married 2 of his kids.
Wow.
Not even a word.
Yeah.
Not even a letter. Not even a note. Not even a. But I'm sure if I ever got down to it, it would be there was a problem, something happened, didn't want to deal with it, easier to move on.
Yeah.
Well, that stinks, man, and that's just the reality. There are church options everywhere you go, and then there's these politically polarizing issues as well, like seriously, the MAGA movement, the woke church movement. Where are you in the cross section of that?
Yeah.
You want to know my answer? Nowhere.
Yeah.
So because I'm in no man's land, to some I'm not hard enough, to some I'm too hard.
Yep.
And I mean, I didn't say a word really about the elections.
Yeah.
Like we have an election as we're recording this
Yeah.
tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. Yep.
And I intentionally, I even made a joke about it
You
Sunday.
did.
I
Yeah.
said, hey, this is what's in the news, but I'd rather get news from a different news source.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then I want to leave with this kind of statement and kind of dwell on a little bit. We should spend more time growing grass than pulling weeds. I've heard that before. I love that. Obviously, weeds need to be pulled, but if that's all you do is spend time in weeds, you're going to get discouraged. Yeah. So attrition's going to happen. And I've made this, I don't know if I'm right here, and somebody can call me and correct me if you want to. In the case of this man, I just gave an example, left my church, his family. I mean, I don't go after him.
Yeah.
I mean, if they decide to leave the church without telling me, what am I going to say is going to change their mind?
Yeah.
And I think guys can really lose their minds here. Maybe God was just moving them on.
Yeah.
Maybe there's just something going on that, maybe there's something far deeper than I would ever know. Maybe I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay that God moves somebody down the road to another church.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be willing to trust God. There's no metric that you can say. There's no magic number if we don't grow by 50 this year. Now, can you set up goals and shoot for goals? Of course you can. But can you define faithfulness and define God's goodness based on those things, I don't think you can do that.
And I think that's, again, something we just have to accept. What pastors, church leaders have to accept is the metrics of numbers is not necessarily a metric of health or even a metric of growth. I think there's a lot of focus, and understandably so, because on the one hand, you can't ignore numbers, that they're a part of it, But I think there's this tendency to be focused more on quantity than quality, and the quality of your church is in fact, I know of churches that might have good quantity, but the quality of those people, not so much.
Absolutely, yeah. One final statement, and we'll pick this up next time. Somebody said that if you're not careful, you spend more time concerning yourself as to how many people are in your church rather than what are those people like.
Yeah.
It's a great statement.
That's really good.
Let's pick this up next time.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you right here on Church Advance with Brian Sams.
Well, thanks again for joining us for today's episode. And remember that you can get early access to upcoming episodes and conversations for free at briansams.com. Just head over to briansams.com to get early access to upcoming episodes before they officially drop to our podcast feed and YouTube channel. Church Advance with Brian Sams is hosted by Brian Sams and co-hosted and produced by myself, Luke Clayton, and my team at mustincrease.com. If you enjoy this content, then please take a moment to share it with your friends and let other pastors and church leaders know about this podcast. We also hope that you'll subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to podcasts. We want to thank you so much for being a part of our audience and encourage you to continue to join us for each episode as we continue to advance a reformation of fellowship, partnership, and gospel hope amongst Bible-believing pastors. Thanks again for joining us for Church Advance with Brian Sams.